Okay, this is episode 90 of the Press Box Podcast. Today on the Press Box Podcast, opening weekend of college football 2021. It was a great weekend of college football. Not only did we have some really great football games, we had full stadiums across the country. And boy, it looked like old times, and it was great to see that as college football fans are back cheering on their teams. We had some really great matchups. I had number 3 against number 5. We had Notre Dame playing Florida State on Sunday night. We had some upsets. We had some FCS teams beating some FBS teams. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about the rankings. We'll also talk a little bit about some specific games and what we think the ramifications of the outcome of those games are going to be. So a great episode 90 to talk about the upcoming or the recently concluded first weekend of college football. Make sure you check us out on PressBoxPod, at PressBoxPod on Twitter. Go ahead and subscribe to that as well, or follow us on Twitter. We've got an Instagram account at PressBoxPod as well. Leave us a review, subscribe to that. And of course, our YouTube channel, the PressBox Podcast. Make sure you hit the like button on those episodes or those segments and subscribe to that as well. Our producer, Nathan Miranda, has done an excellent job behind the scenes putting all that together. And we would like for you to interact with us. We have a lot of new subscribers, a lot of new listeners, and we're trying to get as much content out there in different areas as we can. So, without further ado, episode 90 of the Press Box Podcast, College Football Opening Weekend. Okay, welcome back to the Press Box Podcast. I'm your co-host, Ralph Miranda. I'll be joined today by my producer, Nathan Miranda, and this is episode 90, if you're counting at home, of the Press Box Podcast. And today we're going to talk about college football. The first full week of college football was concluded last night with Notre Dame's game at Florida State. I believe there's one or two, or maybe at least one game today, but the bulk of the games were concluded from Thursday night through last night. So we're going to talk a little recap of college football. I'm going to start by going over the top 25 or the top 20, I guess, probably the best way to look at it, going into this week, going to the preseason top 20, if you will. Of course, Alabama was number 1. Oklahoma was number 2. Clemson was 3. Ohio State was 4. Georgia was 5. Texas A&M was 6. Iowa State was 7. Cincinnati was 8. Notre Dame was 9th. North Carolina was 10th. Rounding out the top 20, you had Oregon, Wisconsin, Florida, Miami at 14, Southern Cal, LSU, Indiana, Iowa, and Penn State at 19, and then Washington at 20. We'll just kind of stop right there. So that was the preseason top 25 or top teams in the country, and there were a lot of interesting games over the weekend. Of course, it all started Thursday night with a few games on TV that night. Tennessee opened their season Thursday night with a big win over Bowling Green to give the Vols a 1-0 start. They will play Pittsburgh this Saturday in a non-conference game, which will be a pretty good test for Tennessee. Pittsburgh is, not a great football team, but a good enough football team to come into Neyland Stadium and give the Volunteers a pretty good test. Most of the top 25 went as you would expect. Really interesting. Number 1, Alabama. New running back, new quarterback in Bryce Young. Of course, same old coach, Nick Saban. So you know what you're going to get from Alabama. And it didn't look like they had missed a beat. Now they have a kicker that may be one of the best in the country, so they can kick field goals as well. Alabama jumped all over Miami from the get-go. It really was never close, and the final score was, I believe, 44-13. I'm going to check it here in a minute to make sure that I've got the right score. But it really doesn't matter because they were all over Miami. And Miami was the number 14th ranked team in the country. But again, that's a little bit deceiving, as we all know, when it comes to rankings. And the weird thing about that game was that the Miami quarterback before the game basically said that they were going to kick Alabama's you-know-what because the U was back. And obviously probably not a good thing to say. Would you say that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why he'd possibly say that. Yeah. I mean, because obviously I guess he wants to show he's confident and he thinks they're good. But you can say that without making a bold statement like that, especially against Alabama. Who doesn't need? They don't need any other incentive to beat you. I mean,
That's
you're
right.
just giving them more incentive, and most likely that's not going to happen. So I don't know. It's just where's the upside to that? Like, I guess if they did beat Alabama, he could go back and say, "Look, I told everybody." Like, but
yeah,
great. Like,
no, I agree with that. I think maybe who knows what the reasoning was, but maybe some of the alumni had gotten remember Miami was the Alabama of college football back in the 80s and the 90s. And maybe some of the alumni said, look, we got to get some of that Miami swag back. Yeah, so they thought, okay, let's see if we could do that. But you're right. That was not the right time to do it against Alabama.
It was 44-13.
It was 44-13, so I did have the right score. Now, Thursday night, not only did Tennessee open up Thursday night, but we also had Ohio State. They were the number 4th ranked team in the country. They beat Minnesota at Minnesota, 45-31. Now, the interesting thing about that game is, Minnesota was ranked last year. In fact, I think they were undefeated, if I'm not mistaken, when they played Ohio State, or maybe only had one loss. And they gave Ohio State a pretty tough game, and they did so Thursday night as well. That game was 31-24 Minnesota deep into the third quarter, and then Ohio State kind of turned it on and pulled away a little bit. But interesting that Ohio State struggled with Minnesota. But again, I'm not going to count that against them because they were on the road and that it was a tough opening game. And you got to give them credit for opening with a tough game. I've always said that. So that kind of covers Alabama and Ohio State, who was number 4. The interesting one, when you think about it, is Oklahoma. Oklahoma was ranked 2nd going into the season. And Oklahoma struggled. They played Tulane, and they were 35-point favorites in that game. And they ended up winning. It was a very close game. I'm going to try to pull up the score here real quickly. But needless to say, Oklahoma should never have played a game that close with Tulane. They won 40-35. They were the 2nd-ranked team in the country. The game was played at home in Norman. And
it was moved to Norman. I think it was supposed to be played.
That's a good point. Thank you. That's a good point. The game was supposed to be played at Tulane, which was down in Louisiana, or excuse me, down in
I think it's New Orleans.
New Orleans, that's right. So the hurricane that just went through prevented that from happening. So really, no pun intended, it was a perfect storm for Oklahoma. They had the game at home, and they struggled, which,
It's strange. Why was that ever meant to be played at Tulane? It's number 2 Oklahoma. That seems like your typical kind of easy opponent to start the season at home. I don't know why they were.
You're right. It could be that maybe Tulane had come to Oklahoma a year or two ago, and the contract said you have to come back to here.
Or was this supposed to be a neutral site, like at the?
It could have been. Maybe it was supposed to be the neutral site. I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe it was supposed to be played at the Superdome or something. I don't know. But they definitely moved it to Oklahoma, and they did struggle. So you had the number 1 team in the country, as planned, as expected, winning rather easily. The number 2 team in the country struggling mightily. The number 4 team in the country, I don't want to say struggling mightily, but they did have a tough time with Minnesota, who I think is a much, much better team than Tulane, obviously. So I'll give Ohio State the benefit of the doubt. The interesting game of the weekend, though, was on Saturday night. The number 3 ranked Clemson Tigers against the number 5 ranked Georgia Bulldogs. That was a game that was played in Charlotte at a neutral site. It had a name to it. I can't remember the name of it.
Oh, it was the something like was something like mayonnaise classic.
That's right. It was Duke's mayonnaise classic or something.
Duke's. Let me see here.
Yeah, that's what it was. I think.
Duke's Mayo Classic.
Duke's mayonnaise. Duke's Mayo Classic. That's right. Very interesting. Very interesting. Name for a game, but needless to say, it was a classic. I mean, anytime you have 2 teams in the top 5 playing each other on the opening game of the season, it's impressive. Some of the things that we figured out from that game, a lot of things happened that were rather interesting. First of all, Clemson lost back-to-back. Look, Georgia won the game 10-3. So let's throw that out there right out the bat. That was the first time since 2010, I believe, that Clemson has lost back-to-back games, because they lost the semifinal game last year to Ohio State, and they lost this game.
I think it was one of the first times they lost an opener every season.
That's right. First time since 2011 they'd lost an opener, and the first time.
And it was to Georgia the last time they lost, wasn't it?
That's right. That's right. And it was also the first time in so many games that they had been shut out in the first half.
Wow. They
scored no points in the first half. So the takeaways from that game is Georgia's defense is really, really good. Georgia's offense, not so much. I mean, they struggled to run the ball. Their passing game struggled. J.T. Daniels is their quarterback, the transfer from Southern Cal. Very good quarterback, but he's not very mobile. So it's very hard if you're getting pass rush to make things happen. So Georgia struggled. And in fact, the only touchdown in the game was a pick six by Georgia in the first half. DJ Uiagalelei, I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. The guy who took over for Trevor Lawrence, who actually started 2 games last year, one against Notre Dame and then the one before that.
Looked pretty good, too.
He did look very good against Notre Dame. But anyway, a pick six was 7-0, and then for the rest of the game, they just exchanged a field goal each. So we know Georgia's defense is very good. We know Clemson's offense is going to struggle because they've lost lots of guys, right? They lost Travis Etienne, they lost Amari Rodgers at wide receiver, and they lost Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, which 3 of your biggest playmakers right there gone.
Well, I guess a lot of people thought that the quarterback, obviously, I mean, they're going to take a step down probably because he was kind of a once in a generation kind of guy for them. But I think that was a position that most people thought it wasn't going to hurt him too bad because this guy looked like he played real well against Notre Dame last year.
That's right.
He was supposed to not really miss a beat, kind of, right?
That's right.
Do you think that's still the thought? Or do you think now it's looking like maybe they're going to struggle at the quarterback position?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I think the difference is that last year he was playing with the playmakers in the 2 games he started. Not only was he playing with the playmakers that Trevor Lawrence had, but he was playing with the offensive line from last year. This year, not only are the playmakers gone, but the offensive line is new. So I think we're seeing that he doesn't have the same team around him that he had last year in the 2 games he started. But I think to answer your question, I think the jury's still out. I think he's a very good quarterback, and I think they'll figure it out. But I don't think Clemson's going to be the overpowering team this year that they've been.
Do you think this is the beginning of the end for Clemson as far as a powerhouse team for the foreseeable future? Or do you think it's just a minor little pickup?
Yeah. I don't think it's the beginning of the end. I think Clemson is always going to be right up there. But I think it's the end of Clemson being so dominant. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense. I think they're going to always be up there, but I don't think they're going to be as dominant as they've been unless they're able to bring in more talent, which they should be able to do because, Dabo Swinney's a great recruiter and they've been able to do it in the past.
So you think maybe if you think it's an overreaction to try to look at that game now and say Clemson's done, that they won't be in the playoffs much anymore?
Yes.
That's overreaction.
Yes, that's a definite overreaction. I mean, remember they play in the ACC, which is a fairly weak conference. I don't think they're going to lose an ACC game.
And like we talked about too, looking at just this season, I mean, losing your first game is the time to lose a game, right?
Correct.
Because it's when you get to the end of the year, if they win out, assuming at the end of the year, people are going to forget about that. Like that was the first game of the season. It was against a good team, Georgia. Like it's not going to hurt them that much to lose this game.
Correct.
They're still going to be in a great position at the end of the year.
Correct.
I mean,
you're exactly right. If they win out, go 10-1 or 11-1, whatever. Yeah. And win the ACC championship, they're going to be in the mix.
I don't know if this is what they're thinking, but if they know we have to play Georgia at some point, you might as well make it the first game. Make your toughest team. Maybe usually it's the other way around with teams, but they want to have a tune-up game at the start.
You're right.
But maybe make your toughest game the first game. That way, if you win, great. If you lose, it doesn't hurt you that much. If they were undefeated in the last week of the season, they lost to Georgia. That could possibly, knock them out of a playoff thing because you're going to have a lot of other teams at that point in time who are vying for that spot.
Right. Well, the only thing that this game, and you bring up some really good points, the only thing that this game may really hurt Clemson is and it's way too early to start talking about this, but Georgia, if you look at Georgia's schedule, they only have 2 teams on the schedule left that really are going to be even remotely a challenge: Florida and Auburn. They don't have to play Alabama this year. They don't have to play LSU, and they don't have to play Texas A&M. Those are the 3 teams that would be really big challenges for them. So more than likely, they're going to go undefeated. All right. So let's say they do. And then let's say they get in the SEC championship game against Alabama and get beat. Well, now if you have a 1-loss Georgia and a 1-loss Clemson,
and they beat Clemson,
they're going to take Georgia. Okay. Yeah. So that's, and assuming there's other teams that are undefeated or with 1 loss. So that's the only thing that could hurt Clemson at the end of this year if that scenario turns up. Now, if Georgia loses a game this year and then loses the SEC championship, 2 losses would probably not be good enough to get them in. But I got to give Clemson credit. I mean, I give any team credit that is not afraid to play a team that's pretty good early in the season, because I think that only shows you how good you are and makes you a better football team.
Yeah, I think Darby Swinney, I think he kind of referenced that in his post-game press conference about they could have played basically, he didn't use these words, but they could have played like a tune-up game, but they challenged themselves the first game.
Sure. Sure, exactly. I mean, I think that's that was commendable, But Georgia, I'm not sure they're out of the woods. I think their defense is good enough to get them anywhere, but their offense is going to need some work. But Clemson's got a pretty good defense too. So it was a really good college football game. And the interesting thing, let's talk a little bit about we went over the top 5 now, so we've got those teams taken care of. Texas A&M, they played a laugher against a tune-up game, if you will. Cincinnati won big over Toledo. So those teams took care of business. North Carolina got beat over the weekend. Number 10th team in the country got beat by, I believe, Virginia Tech. So that was not a good opening for them. So now let's talk about Notre Dame, number 9th in the country. Same scenario here. We had 2 very different games. Saturday, you had a defensive struggle, Georgia and Clemson, number 3 against number 5. Last night, you had number 9, Notre Dame, against unranked Florida State at Doak Campbell Stadium in Tallahassee on a night when they were honoring Bobby Bowden, who passed away this year. So it was a definitely hostile environment for Notre Dame. But I got to give Notre Dame credit, as I've said. They are not afraid to play anybody, anywhere. And that was not an easy game for them to open up with. But you had 2 different games. Defensive struggle Saturday night. Pretty much an offensive battle last night with Notre Dame winning in overtime 41-38. You watched a little bit of that game with me last night. What were your takeaways of that game? Or at least your initial reactions?
Well, I remember early in the game I was telling you that Florida State's not that good. Mm-hmm. So Notre Dame should be ashamed if they lose this game.
That's right. I agree with that.
I guess Florida State just didn't look impressive, right? They didn't look like they were really explosive on offense. Their defense, I guess, looked all right, but I don't think Notre Dame's offense looked that great. So I think that was kind of a wash, I guess. I don't know. I just wasn't very impressed with Florida State, I guess. That's my point. Mm-hmm. And then also, Notre Dame's tight end's awesome.
Yes, he is. Great. Yeah, he is.
I don't know about Notre Dame's quarterback yet. I know you're not really big on him. You can probably talk about that some.
Yeah.
I don't really know what to think yet. He didn't look horrible. I just watched the first half, mind you. But
right.
And I understand he got even better the second half. So he didn't look horrible in the first half. I mean, I don't really know what to think of him yet. The jury's still out for him, I think. And then outside of that, Notre Dame's offense, and we've talked about this before too. In the past few years within book, they've been more explosive than Notre Dame's offenses have typically been in the past.
Right.
I think they're back to their past self now. I don't think they're like a quick strike offense whatsoever.
No.
Their defense, though, which you told me going in, I think their front seven's one of the best in the country.
Yes.
And they did look really good.
Mm-hmm.
They just you're probably getting into this again, but when you can't keep going like 3 and out on offense, and I mean the defense eventually, no matter how good they are, if you keep putting them in bad situations or you just don't give them a lot of breathers, eventually something's going to break through. They're going to score some points against you.
Right.
Right. I mean, you're still going to be in a good position if you have a great defense, regardless of how their offense performs. Right. But if the offense can't sustain long drives, it's going to wear on the defense, and you're going to give up some points most likely.
Yeah.
So at Notre Dame, I mean, it was a big win, obviously. I think they looked all right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think it's like, oh, they're going to look good this year. I didn't think like, oh, I haven't. Basically, my opinion of Notre Dame hasn't changed going into the game. I don't know. I thought at the beginning of the game, I thought they'll probably be okay this year, Notre Dame. They might lose a game or two. I don't really know.
Right.
Now I feel the same way.
Right. No, I agree with that 100%. I think, Notre Dame's quarterback, Jack Cohn, was a graduate transfer from Wisconsin. He played 4 years at Wisconsin, had some eligibility left. The rule that was in effect, it's been in effect for a few years, transferred to Notre Dame. He did not look very sharp in the first half, with the exception of a couple throws. He underthrew some receivers. He did throw a nice touchdown pass to a receiver in the corner of the end zone, who basically wrestled the ball away from the defender. Notre Dame could not run the ball last night. I mean, they had 69 yards rushing and 35 carries, which is pretty bad. I mean, that's roughly 2 yards a carry. Their offensive line is basically new, with the exception of one starter. So that'll be a fluid, growing experience to get those guys playing together. So he really had no running game, which put a lot of pressure on him. And in the second half, he did a lot better. I mean, he threw 4 touchdowns for the night. One was a swing pass to Kyron Williams, and he ended up making a couple nice moves to score. And then another deep touchdown pass in the corner of the end zone on 3rd and 1, which I thought was a gutsy call on 3rd and 1 from your opponent's 35-yard line to throw it deep down the corner, but it was a perfect pass. So I think he's okay. I mean, I didn't think a lot of him in the first half, but I think he's going to be okay. But they're going to have to run the football like they did last few years, and if they can't, it's going to be tough, because as much as their tight end is awesome and definitely an All-American and probably going to be a first-round draft pick, you can't throw to him all the time. Teams are going to figure that out.
Yeah, we were sitting there, like, it would be like a 3rd and 5. I remember you asked, what do you think they're going to do? It's the third of the tight end. You go, yep, and sure enough, they look at the third of the tight end. Like,
exactly.
Like they know they're looking for this one. The defense is looking for this.
Exactly.
Which is even more inexplainable. I think they just blew coverage, but even more inexplainable how I think it was the opening drive, maybe. It was. Notre Dame had a 4th down, and the time was wide open somehow. Yeah. And he scored a touchdown. I think they just blew coverage. But.
And I think their defense, going to the defensive side of the ball, they played this defensive coordinator, the new defensive coordinator that Notre Dame has, they got from Cincinnati. I think he's learning a little bit as he goes along. This is a step above Cincinnati, this kind of competition. But he's installed more of an attacking type defense, which is going to lend itself to giving up a big play occasionally. They gave up a lot of big plays last night, which was probably not good. But another thing that Notre Dame, that I don't understand, we've talked about this in the past, Notre Dame had a 38-20 lead late in the third quarter, and Florida State put in a new quarterback, which was really kind of interesting. I didn't realize this till I saw it last night, that the starting quarterback for Florida State actually misplaced his helmet on the sideline and couldn't find it. So they put this other guy in, Mackenzie Milton. And those of you who may remember Mackenzie Milton, he was the starting quarterback for Central Florida back when they went undefeated in 2018. And in 2017 they went undefeated. He was also the starter in 2018. He tore up his knee in November of 2018, a very, very serious knee injury, kind of similar to maybe Alex Smith or some of these other really serious injuries where there was nerve damage and so forth, as well as ligament damage.
Yeah, it said that he underwent multiple complex surgeries to save his right leg.
Yes.
So I guess there was the chance he could have lost his leg.
Yes, there was. So he was been out of football basically 2 full seasons. So you got to give that kid a tremendous amount of credit for not only coming back, for having the willpower to want to come back. I mean, it would have been very easy for him to say, hey, look, I've accomplished a lot. I don't know that I can do this. It wasn't like an NFL guy who's making millions of dollars. So, yeah, got to give him credit. So, anyway, the Florida State quarterback misplaces his helmet, so they got to run this guy in there, and then he does so well that they never take him out of the game. Okay, it's kind of like the Wally Pipp thing, with what's his name, Lou Gehrig. But anyway, Notre Dame goes to a prevent defense, and, that is, to me, anytime you go to a prevent defense, which is not what you normally do, you're basically preventing yourself from winning. So they sit back, Notre Dame, and Mackenzie Milton's completing passes down the field, running, and they obviously get close to the goal line and they score. So they make a comeback and they tie the game. So I think Notre Dame, if they're going to be an aggressive defense, you're going to have to stick with that. And it was very it was very advantageous in the first half because I think they sacked the Florida State quarterback like 4 or 5 times. So yeah, they're going to have to figure that out, and not make those kind of tactical errors. But anyway, a good quality opponent. Florida State may not be what they were in the 90s and early 2000s, but they do have a lot of talent. Notre Dame went into a hostile environment and came away with the win. Always better to correct your mistakes from week 1 to week 2 when you're correcting them, having a win in your back pocket as opposed to a loss. So Notre Dame should stay right where they are. Cincinnati should stay. The top 5 or the top 10, with the exception of North Carolina, who will drop out of the top 10, should stay pretty much the same. The only difference is you're probably going to see Alabama at 1. I would guess you're going to see Georgia move up to number 2 with their victory. Ohio State will probably be 3, and I'm guessing Oklahoma will be 4. And Clemson will probably drop to 5. That's about as far as I think they'll drop them. And then some 6 to 10 will stay the same, with the exception of North Carolina, who will drop out. So the only other game I really want to talk a lot about, and it's not really to talk. Well, a couple games I want to talk about. Wisconsin was ranked number 12. They played Penn State at home, and Penn State was ranked 19th. Very low-scoring game. Penn State ended up winning it 16-10, I believe. But Wisconsin does not, their offense looks pretty rough right now, and I think they're going to have to make some corrections on that. And Penn State, same thing. So we'll see about that. The other game was Washington. Washington was ranked 20th. Now, preseason ranking, you never know what it means, right? They hosted Montana, okay? Montana is a FCS school, or the old 1AA, and Montana beat them on their home field. The Montana coach in his post-game press conference said, quote, "Make no mistake about it, this is Appy State beating Michigan." And those of you who know college football remember 2007, Appalachian State opening game went up to the Big House at Michigan and knocked off the number 3 ranked Wolverines. I wouldn't quite agree with the coach totally. Washington was not the number 3 team in the country, but nonetheless, anytime a 1AA or FCS team goes into a Power 5 conference team's home stadium and beats them, that's big news. So Washington will probably drop completely out of the rankings, and they have a lot of soul searching to do. The other game I want to talk about.
Before you
go ahead.
I saw an interesting stat here. There were 6 FCS upsets over FBS teams.
Interesting.
Just this past weekend,
right.
from September 2nd. Or I guess in this season so far.
Go ahead.
From September 2nd through September 4th.
Right.
And in the 2019 and 2020 to 21 season combined, there were 5.
Right.
So already in the first week or so of the football season, there's been more upsets in the last 2 combined.
Right.
2019 season there were 3, and then 2020-21 season there were 2, which is interesting. I don't know if there's more to come this year or what the deal is, but I just thought I'd point that out. That was interesting.
No, that was a good one to point out. Let me see if I can find the other one here. There was another one I wanted to bring out.
Upsets?
Yeah. Well, Charlotte beat Duke, but Charlotte's a one. Charlotte.
That wasn't.
Yeah,
I'm looking at it right here. UC Davis beat Tulsa on September 2nd.
Okay, that was definitely. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
That
falls fits the category,
right? But okay. Tulsa's
right.
Eastern Washington beat UNLV on September 2nd. South Dakota State beat Colorado State September 3rd.
All right.
Holy Cross beat UConn September 4th.
Okay.
You had the big Montana and Washington.
That was
September
definitely
4th.
one.
And then East Tennessee State beat Vanderbilt.
Right. Which
2033.
Yeah, again, that was probably fits the category of the Washington, but then again, Vanderbilt, and I'm sorry if I offend anybody, Vanderbilt should probably be a 1AA school. I mean, they're not really Southeastern Conference caliber.
Yeah, if you want to argue they shouldn't be in the SEC, that's a good point. But the fact is they are, and the SEC team lost by 20 points to ETSU.
I give you 100%. I agree with that 100%. Yes, I do. No question. You're exactly right about that, and it definitely qualifies as a tremendous upset. It doesn't look good for the Southeastern Conference.
And before you move on to the last game you were talking about, too, was you going to talk about UCLA game? Or?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead and talk about it. So.
No, go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to talk about, so go ahead.
Yeah, that was the other game I wanted to bring out. And LSU goes to UCLA and gets beat 38-27. LSU was the 16th ranked team in the country. Again, the rankings really don't mean much. First rankings don't mean much because you really don't know how good these teams are. But the thing about LSU that's interesting is, 2 years ago they had Joe Burrow and of course lots of offensive playmakers. Joe Burrow had. I would equate the season Joe Burrow had 2 years ago to what Joe Flacco did in 2012 with the Ravens. Taking them all the way to the Super Bowl championship, a career year that turned into a big money for Flacco, and that year that Joe Burrow had not only turned into being the number 1 draft pick with the Bengals, but LSU was 15-0 and won the national championship and easily won it.
It made LSU apparently seemed to be like a new powerhouse of college football.
Yes.
Which was inaccurate.
Right. Well, last year they lose Joe Burrow as well as a couple of those receivers and defensive guys, and they go 5-5. Now, you can dismiss that a little bit because we had a COVID year. We had all the stuff that went on last year. Okay. Well, now they come out of the gate and they lose to UCLA, a Pac-12 team, which probably shouldn't have happened.
Who struggled recently.
Struggled very much so recently, right? Yeah. So, LSU is looking like one that maybe that was a lucky year from the standpoint of how everything fell into place. And if I was Ed Orgeron, he's definitely going to be on the hot seat because the LSU fans are not going to put up with another sub-500 season, regardless of the fact that they won a national championship.
Yeah, like what? We talked about this today. What's the deal with LSU? Like, I know they lost a lot of people. Okay,
right.
But let's look at last season first. They lost a lot of people. But you won 15-0 the year before that, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say you lost a lot of big guys. Fine. Well, that doesn't mean you should win more than 5 games. I would think.
I would agree.
Right? So they really underperformed last season.
I would agree.
And the COVID stuff, I know that was tough, but that was for everybody. And other people, my point is there's an even playing field. So I don't really look at that much.
Right.
And then this season they open up and lose again. Like, what? First of all, do you think Ed Orgeron is overrated? Do you think he didn't have much to do with that 15-0 season, or do you think it's something else? Like, I
think that I think Ed Orgeron.
He should be in the hot seat.
Yeah, I think he is a little overrated. I mean, the reason I say that is the offensive coordinator that they had in 2019 left with Joe Burrow.
That's right.
To go be the offensive coordinator for the Bengals. So, 1, he lost his coordinator. 2, he's having a rough time. He's supposed to be a defensive coach, Orgeron, and their defense was horrible last year, and it looks like it's horrible again. Okay? And I think that's kind of the thing that's going to get him into trouble is that, 1, he hasn't been able. It looks like the performance that they had in 2019 was due to the coordinator and not Orgeron. And now he can't get his defensive coordinator. He can't get his defense to play to the level that he should be playing. So, I think he's definitely on the hot seat, and I think he's a little overrated. I mean, Ed Orgeron has got a great persona, and
very colorful guy.
Very colorful guy. That's a great way to put it. Yes, very much so.
Helps his persona.
So, we'll see. I mean, I think we'll see what kind of season they have.
Do you think UCLA is like, do you think they're here to stay now? Are they for real? Or do you think that was just kind of a,
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you think that's just kind of it was an upset, but they're not really going to, compete for the Pac-12 title or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to compete for the Pac-12 title. I think they're a better football team. I think they're getting better, but I think I don't think they're going to compete.
That's what I was reading. Supposedly they're improving. I guess they said they had a string of tight defeats. I was reading here. I guess last season,
right.
They improved still,
right?
And then I guess they have some blue chip transfers this year, like a running back
right.
from Michigan and a linebacker from Alabama. It looks
like right.
So I guess they were expected to maybe take another step forward this year, and this just has, of course, made that look like it's even.
Yeah,
going to be a bigger step, I guess.
Well, and I think you just hit on
Chip
something.
Kelly's their coach. How long has he been there?
It's been about 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's been about 3 or 4 years. No, I think you just brought up a really good point that that we might have glossed over is, transfers they brought in. With this transfer portal now, it's getting out of hand. And I mean, look at Florida State. They brought in 3 guys on defense through the transfer portal. So college football is almost becoming like free agency in the NFL. I mean, from the standpoint of you can improve your team right away with 2 or 3 transfers, and that's, I think that's a problem because I think you're going to end up with, guys moving around too much, and it's gonna cause a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I don't really know. Well, that's for another time, maybe, to discuss the whole transfer.
Yes, it is.
I don't even know all the ins and outs.
No, it is. I just.
But no. But I was going to say, I would think that it's probably too easy right now to transfer. But I do think you need some type of room for transfer for the ability to transfer.
You do.
Given certain circumstances.
You
like
do.
A new coaching staff comes in.
I agree.
Or whatever.
I agree.
I mean? But I also how do you feel? I also know how I feel though about all these graduate players. Like, they just play 4 years out of school and now they're graduates and they go to a whole other school for a year. Like, I don't know. It's just kind of weird.
Well, I think the reason I don't have a big problem with that is that they have to do something to achieve that. And what I mean by that is these guys had the ability to graduate in 3 years, right? So in other words, they were playing,
or 4 years. You
extra
year of eligibility.
Yeah, you only got 4 years of eligibility, right?
But you can have an extra year though.
You got 5 years to play your 4. Okay. What I'm trying to say is, if you graduate, if you play 3 years and then you graduate, your 4th year you have the ability to go anywhere you want, right? I mean, I think that's okay because you've had to work to do that.
Yeah, I guess my point though is you could still have an injury or a red shirt, and you could still graduate from your university in 4 years.
You could, yeah.
And then go to your 5th year.
Yeah.
You know,
well, that one I would have a problem with almost because then.
But it seems like that's the Washington guy. You said he started 4 years at Wisconsin.
He spent 4 years. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
He spent 4 years.
Yeah,
Maybe it was one red shirt then? Is that?
I don't know. I'll have to check on that.
My point is, it sounds like he went 4 school years to Wisconsin.
And then
and now he's at his
but here's the thing. He must have, for him to be able to play at Notre Dame, they must have redshirted him his freshman year. Right. Exactly.
Right, but my point is, you don't necessarily have to graduate early to do this.
You're right.
Be redshirted
You're right.
Or have an injury.
Good point. Excellent point. No, I'm glad you brought that up. That's an excellent point.
And my thing with this guy, too, if he was that good, why wouldn't Wisconsin make sure, you have an extra year? Why don't you become a graduate here and play?
Right.
They must not really care, right? I mean,
well, yeah, that's true.
So how good is he?
Or else they brought in somebody that
they thought was better.
Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? But, we'll get into that in another episode. I do want to touch on Coastal Carolina because our friend of the podcast, Josh Caraway, who we're hoping to get on here pretty soon again to talk a little bit about college football. Coastal Carolina is ranked 22 going in. Remember last year they were undefeated, weren't they?
I believe they were, yeah.
They were, but remember they had to share the title because of, was it a COVID problem that they couldn't play for
what was the deal?
Their conference championship game? No, I know what it was. They beat the team during the season, and then they had to play this team again for the conference championship. But the game was canceled due to COVID, and even though they had a better record, they had to share the title. Wasn't that it?
Yeah, so I believe their Sun Belt Championship game was canceled.
Correct.
All right. And the conference decided to honor both teams as the 2020 Sun Belt Conference co-champions.
Co-champions.
But
right.
I believe, Coast Carolina was 11-0.
Right.
In Louisiana, which that other team was 9-1, and I guess was that the Coastal beat them.
Yeah,
which is completely ridiculous.
Yes, that's what we talked about. Yeah.
So how can you possibly say they're gonna name them co-champions? Now, if both team was undefeated and they didn't have to play each other, somehow.
Right, that's different.
That's different, but
right. Yeah, that was the whole argument last year. Was that the game got canceled, but we should have been named the conference champions.
Not only did one of the co-champions have a loss, but that loss was to the other co-champion.
Correct. So I brought that up to say that Coastal Carolina is definitely a team on the upswing, and they're now 22nd ranked. They beat Citadel 52-14, which, Citadel. But they play Kansas this week. They beat Kansas last year. They play Kansas this year again. They should be able to beat Kansas, I would think. So we don't know. Maybe Coastal Carolina may sneak their way up into the rankings this year and have something to say, kind of like Central Florida did a few years ago.
That was kind of the thing last year too, right? There was the talk of should they get a spot or
right.
So it might be the same this year again, but correct. I think it's gonna be the same problem this year again. It's just for them. I mean, it's tough. Even if they're undefeated, it's going to be tough for a lot of people to really take them seriously and try to advocate for them to get a playoff spot.
Right.
Just because of their schedule, the teams they play.
And that's right. And I think in all fairness to our friend Josh Caraway, look at the 4 teams that were in the playoffs last year: Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, and Ohio State. Can you honestly tell me that Coastal Carolina could have had a chance against any of those 4 teams.
Right. No.
No. Right. So yeah. I mean, now that doesn't mean. What I'm trying to say is that doesn't mean they're not qualified to be a playoff team. It just means they really can't compete.
But like it's a weird thing because they're an FBS team,
right?
Correct. And they're undefeated. You need to have some type of. They need to come out and say like, listen, here's how we determine playoff teams. Because right now it seems like it's kind of like, well, it's by record. If you're an FBS team, you're undefeated.
Right.
But obviously there's more to it than that.
Right.
Because certain teams aren't going to get a chance.
Right.
So they need to have some type of clear outline, or
right.
this is how you operate. If you're a team in one of these conferences, maybe the Sun Belt's included, you're going to have to play one Power 5 conference or have a win over one or two to be considered. They need to have like some rules almost.
Right.
Otherwise, every year it's going to be this thing again of like, well, what should they be or should they not be?
Right.
But if you have clear rules, like maybe if you're from a Sun Belt type of conference, you have to have beaten 2 Power 5 conferences in your season to be. Then it's obvious, it's clear cut.
Right.
They're undefeated, but they didn't qualify.
Right.
With this and this, so obviously they're not in there. I mean, because otherwise every year it's going to be this talk again.
Right. No, you're right, and I think there's some.
And what? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Why can't I don't know the ins and outs, but why can't Coastal Carolina? Why can't they schedule a Power 5 game? Well, I guess I should step back. Technically, Kansas is from a Power 5.
They conference. Are, yeah.
So they do play Power 5, but you know what I'm saying.
I do.
Why can't they schedule an Auburn or a Notre Dame or like some team?
Yeah, they could.
I know Notre Dame's not a conference, but I'm saying a team that's every year considered to be top.
They could. Yeah, they could. I mean,
why couldn't they play Florida State? You know what I mean?
Sure, they could. I mean, but then you run into, do these teams want to play them? I mean, that's another question that comes up. That's true. That, I mean, they're probably good enough for a team to say, hey, I mean, are we going to gain anything from playing this team?
That's a good point.
Yeah,
they're not a tune-up game because they're good.
No, they're not a tune-up game.
So it's a challenge for these teams. But then again, if you beat them, you're supposed to have beaten them.
Correct.
So where do you win?
Correct.
And I guess I'm stepping all over myself too. Florida State's not in the Power 5 conference, are they?
Yeah, they are. They're an ACC.
Oh, then they.
Yeah, they are. No, they're good. I memean, listen. I think there's been some talk about expanding the playoff to 8 teams, and I think that's what they should do.
That's the answer to it.
That would be the answer, because then what you do is you got 5 power conferences, right? Those 5 champions are in the playoffs. You got 3 other spots. Notre Dame, if they qualify, okay, the Sun Belt and one other. Exactly. So now you've got it fixed, okay, and now you can go from there.
That's the answer.
And you've even got that one spot for maybe one of these teams from the Power 5 who finished second, that's still pretty good, right? Like, let's say Georgia and Alabama are undefeated, and Alabama beats them in the SEC championship. Alabama goes as the SEC champion, but Georgia's still good enough to get there. Okay. Yeah. And then that's what they're going to have to do. I mean, if they don't, you're going to have this problem every year because there's more than one Coastal Carolina out there.
Well, Cincinnati was the same way last year.
Cincinnati's the same way last year. That's right.
And those teams could get 2 of those 3 spots.
Sure, sure they could. And and if Notre Dame doesn't qualify for whatever reason, you have 3 spots.
Yeah.
So
I think that's the only way to solve it.
That's the only way to solve it, and I hope that they can get to that point.
I think that's going to happen eventually too.
It's got to happen. It's got to happen. There's no question. So anyway, a good first week of college football. I think I look at the first week of college football and the rankings kind of like a sieve. If you're panning for gold, you take your little pan that's got the little sieve in the bottom, so that when you dig up the sand, you shake it and all the sand and stuff and mud comes out, and then what's left are the nuggets, and then you can pick out the ones that are the gold nuggets. That's how the first week of college football is, right? Because now you're taking all those teams and you put them in the sieve and you're shaking them out, and you're kind of seeing, well, this team really wasn't the 10th best team in the country. This team was, and after a couple weeks, you start to see who the cream of the crop is, and that's when you're that's when you can really tell what your ranking should be, right? And I've always said that I think they'll never do this because of TV, like Saturday night. Oh, the number 3 versus number 5. Well, you really shouldn't even start ranking these teams until about week 3, right? Week 4, because then you'll know.
Yeah.
But they're not going to do that because then you can't promote it. So anyway, that's what the first week is like. We'll be back again next week to talk about next week's games. I think next week is going to be. Now that you've had so many of these really good matchups this weekend, I think you're going to see next week a lot of these teams start playing their tune-up games or whatever you call it. I think Alabama will probably play somebody that's that they shouldn't be playing. Notre Dame plays Toledo. I mean, I think you're going to see a lot of this next week. Second week of the season is usually when you see some of that go on. Let me see if I can figure it out here.
Yeah, I'll look up some
Yeah,
of
we
these,
can look it up.
Alabama has Mercer.
There you go. Mercer, yeah.
That's great. And,
right, yeah.
Clemson has, let's see here. Clemson will be playing South Carolina State. You're right. Like these teams are just getting...
Notre Dame plays Toledo. Penn State plays Ball State. Let's see what else.
Oklahoma. Who's Oklahoma play?
Clemson. Yeah, we said Clemson.
Oklahoma plays West Carolina
Western Carolina.
Western Carolina. Yeah.
So I'm right. I mean, next week's going to be not going to be a very good week for college football from the standpoint of Georgia plays UAB.
Yeah, that's interesting. I thought historically the first game was more tuned, but it looks like it's usually they'll play a pretty challenging team first, and then they'll go to the tune.
Yeah, because it's kind of the big, they play these like Duke Mayo games, and
they have these classics, these kickoff classics.
Yeah. So next week won't be a very things should pan out pretty much the way it
should
go
as you expect next week.
It should,
or it could add to that already 6 FCS upsets. Maybe some of these teams could add to that.
You never know. That's right. I do want to give a shout out to Tennessee, though, for all our Tennessee fans out there. And new coach, new offense. I was watching the game with a friend of mine who is a big Tennessee fan, and he was all concerned about the fact that Tennessee did not look really good offensively. And I said, well, look, first of all, they're playing Bowling Green. Second of all, you got a new quarterback. You got a lot of new players on your team on offense. It takes a game to kind of get comfortable. And they're not going to show everything. I mean, they probably felt like, hey, we can probably beat Bowling Green. So let's not show everything to our upcoming opponents. But they handled business, Tennessee. I mean, their defense played well, and they took care of business.
I think they were favored by like maybe 35, and they won by like 32.
Exactly.
I mean, they basically did what they were expected to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say to all the Tennessee fans out there, you got to give this guy some time, okay? I mean, Tennessee's had... let's see, 1, 2, 3. This is like their fourth coach since Lane Kiffin up and ran away to Southern Cal. 4 coaches in 10 years. It's hard to build a program when that happens. So you got to give this guy a little time. Tennessee's talent is very depleted right now. They've had a lot of transfers leave the program. They're recruiting. They're trying to bring guys in, but they don't have the talent level yet to compete with the teams like Alabama, LSU, Georgia, some of these teams, Florida. So it's going to be a year where if they can win all their non-conference games and maybe beat a Vanderbilt, which I think they will, and maybe sneak up and beat a Kentucky or a South Carolina, they can win 6 games and get to a bowl. But it's going to take some time, okay? So don't give up on them yet. I think they're going to be fine, and I think it'd be good for college football when Tennessee does get back, because they have a tremendous college football tradition.
I agree with that. And what do you, real quick, next week they play at home against Pittsburgh. What do you expect? Do you expect them to handle business against Pittsburgh?
Well, that's going to be the test, right? Because, as I said, if they win all their non-conference games, Pittsburgh is by far going to be their toughest non-conference game, and I think Pittsburgh has the ability to come in here and beat them. So we'll be able to tell a lot about Tennessee after next week. And what I mean by that is if they play a solid game, no mistakes. What I mean by that is lots of offsides and lots of missed coverages. They play a solid football game, even if they lose it, okay? If it's a solid game where they lose 28-24, something like that, I think you can't be that unhappy. If they win, great. But if they start making mistakes, fumbles, interceptions, then I think you've got a problem. So anyway, we'll see, and it'll be interesting to see. So we'll be back next week to recap college football as well. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Remember, at PressBoxPod is our Twitter account. We'd love for you to join us on there. Give us your thoughts on the opening week of college football. Remember the PressBox Podcast YouTube channel, very popular channel. We've been getting a lot of views on the segments that our producer Nathan's been putting up. We want you to go there and give us your comments there, as well as like the channel and subscribe to it. And make sure you go to at PressBoxPod as well.
On Instagram also.
Go ahead.
PressBoxPod.
At PressBoxPod on Instagram as well. So I'm an old guy. I don't know all about this social media stuff, but our producer, Nathan, does. He's been doing a great job keeping up with it, as has my other co-host, Joseph Miranda, who's been tweeting out a lot of things as well. So they're the guys who are going to keep you informed. I'm just the guy that opens my mouth and talks most of the time on the podcast. So thanks for joining us. We look for you next week on the Press Box Podcast.